What's up, guys? Welcome back to Entrepreneur Hour Podcast and Entrepreneur Hour TV, where we create superhuman entrepreneurs. I've got a repeat guest and a guy, I said this before, and I'm not saying this just to flatter my guest here today, but there's a couple guys that have come on my show over the years, and a few of them have stood out as like, I leave and I'm like, man, that guy was a genius. This is one of them. I would say Ryan Levesque was the first one. Nir Eyal was the second one. So Nir, man,
Oh
welcome back to
man,
the show. How are you?
can you set the bar any higher? That's a tough one.
Yeah, you're right.
If I don't,
No
if
pressure.
people are gonna listen to this podcast and be like, that guy wasn't that much of a genius. What are you talking?
Well, you can certainly stand on our first interview, which I'm going to link that. You guys can either below or above, depending on whether you're watching or listening. You can check our first
Okay.
discussion with Nir, which was like 6 to 8 months ago. We talked about at the time, his book launch of Indistractable. Today, we're going to talk about a book that came out previous to that. I don't know if you want to call him a series or not, but it ended up kind of working that way. But the book called Hooked, which we just finished in my VIP book club. And I had a lot of questions about it. So I reached back out to Nir and said, Nir, let's talk, man. This is some really, really empowering stuff. Specifically, if you have frequency in your business. We're going to explain what that is. Hang tight. Nir, man, what's been up since the book launched, since the last time you joined us with Indistractable? What's up in your world?
Well, the world's kind of gone upside down. I'm not sure when people are going to read
It's
this or hear this, but yeah, the world is definitely a different place now than when we last spoke. And it's in many ways, I feel like I'm so glad that I wrote Indistractable when I did, because
yeah,
I feel like so many people now, especially, people who are working from home, if they're also homeschooling their kids at the same time, 830 million kids are suddenly
yeah.
homeschooled this past week. I mean, this is unprecedented. What is it? A third of Americans are on lockdown.
It's crazy.
And so a lot of people have to adjust to this new reality of having to make your own schedule. And this is in a time when we are so fearful of what's going on in the world that a lot of people
Mhm.
feel this urge, this itch to constantly check their devices to see what's happening in the news, to check in on loved ones. And of course, those things are positive. I've never been one of these technophobes that say,
Yeah,
"Oh,
right.
it's the technology is melting your brain." But I will say that now more than ever, that if you let distraction pull you off track, then it's going to do so, because we are so full of what we talked about last time, these internal triggers, the
Mm,
fear, the uncertainty, the loneliness, the fatigue that gets us to keep checking and checking and checking, that I think now more than ever, it's really imperative that we learn how to become indistractable ourselves, as
mm.
well as teach our children how to become indistractable, because suddenly billions of people right now don't have the constraints of a work environment. And for
Yeah,
many of us, that's a good thing. I mean, I know we were talking earlier before we started recording here about how this is kind of like our lifestyle, right? We
yeah.
both work for ourselves, we work from home. I happen to have homeschooled my daughter for the past 5 years.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, and so but to make that kind of adjustment super quick is
Yeah.
really tough. And I think people are really looking for answers to, man, with so much disruption, with so many things happening in the world, how can I make sure I focus on what's important in my life?
Yeah. Well, so as I mentioned, we did your book in Hooked, not Indistractable, but you referenced in Hooked that the average person it's like 80 to 120 times. I think you said 120. I've read 80, but let's say somewhere in that ballpark. 120 times a
A
day
lot.
someone check. A lot. Here's the crazy thing. I did the math, kind of adding on to this, and having to reteach this, or part of what I do in hosting this community is say, okay, here's what this is. Now here's potentially what it means for you, or here's how you take the first steps, and just kind of unearthing or reading between the lines and so on and so forth. So anyway, so I added on to that, and we just read it, kind of incongruence. We read The One Thing by Gary Keller in
Yeah.
November. We read your book like in October, so it was perfect, because here we talk about distractions and what have you, and then Hooked, like 120 times people checking their phones. But then we talk about then The One Thing. Gary Keller says 4 hours a day is what you need on your one thing. It's not 12,
Mm.
it's not 16, it's not 20 like so many entrepreneurs think it is. It's you give 4 hours on whatever your one thing is, and you're going to get wind from it. You're going to get
Absolutely.
momentum.
Oh.
You want to know, what's crazy, Nir?
Mm.
This might blow your mind. I don't know. Maybe it won't. I did the math. I said, okay, let's figure that each one of those 120 sessions of checking their phone is an average of 2 minutes. Let's just say for perspective, right? Just for the sake of this conversation. it comes out to exactly 4 hours a day on your phone if you spend 2 hours per session. Now, here's the
Yeah.
deal. Let's assume it's not a full 2-minute session, but it takes you 2 minutes to readapt, readjust, which is way undershooting. It's a super conservative figure. It probably takes you longer than that to readjust and refocus on what you were doing. You're
Mhm.
probably wasting most of your day being distracted back and forth between your phone. And there's your 4 hours right there. If nothing else, there's your 4 hours on your one thing. It's
Right,
pretty wild,
right.
right?
And that's why people become experts at using their phone,
Yeah.
right? Because as I wrote about in Hooked, when we habituate to a particular behavior, that becomes easier and easier, and it
Mm,
becomes kind of like our emotional pacifier, right? I'm
yeah.
feeling uncertain, I'm fearful, I'm lonely, I'm whatever. The more we reach for that device to satiate that discomfort, the
Yeah.
more we form that neural link that becomes what we do to
Yeah.
alleviate pain, whether it's
Mm,
too much booze, too much news, too much football, too much Facebook, whatever it might be. We have to realize that the reason we are turning to these distractions is fundamentally to relieve some kind of emotional itch at
yeah.
the end of the day. And that's really
Mm,
the deeper lesson that I think is really important for people to realize, that if you find yourself distracted, there's probably nothing wrong with you, right? A lot of people jump to that conclusion. Oh, I have a short attention span. I have this. I have an addictive personality.
mm,
It's something wrong with me. Whereas for the
mhm.
vast majority of people, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. It's just that you haven't learned how to regulate these emotions in a healthful way. And so
Yeah.
that's really what I'm trying to help people work through when it comes to becoming indistractable.
And that's such a an empowering. I think there's a lot of people that walk around and they think they're somehow just flawed, inherently flawed, that they don't have any control over this thing, right? Whatever that thing is for them. And I think that's such an reading. If that's all they did was read the book for that purpose alone, to know that they can reclaim power over this thing that they feel they've been forced into submission by, to me, that's worth the read in and of itself. Would you not agree?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that there's two categories of people. There's what we call the blamers and the shamers. So the blamers,
Mhm.
they blame the stuff outside themselves, right? It's the
Yeah.
technology doing it to me. It's my workplace. It's the email. It's the modern world these days,
Yeah.
right? We hear
Yeah.
these types of things said all the time, but that's not helpful, right? You're not going to change these things, right? What are we
Mhm.
going to do? You complaining about Corona isn't going to make it go away. You're going to do
Yeah.
something about it.
Right.
And so it doesn't make sense just to blame. It also
Mhm.
doesn't make sense to shame, kind of the archetype we talked about earlier of saying, how ashamed I am at myself for
Yeah.
getting distracted, how there's something wrong with me, how I'm deficient, how I must be broken in some way. That doesn't work either. And so instead of being a blamer or a shamer, we have to be what we call a claimer. And this is a really important point because, you know, I don't think people realize that you cannot control your emotions. Okay. The sensations you feel cannot be controlled. You can't
Mm.
tell yourself to feel a certain way any more than you could tell yourself not to feel the urge to sneeze, right? The
Sure.
urge is going to be there. What you can do, however, is to decide how you will respond to that impulse. That is
Mm.
where we do have agency and control, is to, you can't control the urge, but you can control the response, hence the word responsibility to that urge, so
Mm.
that you claim responsibility, being a claimer, to say, when I feel these uncomfortable emotional states, I will respond to them in a new and better way, not with a harmful way that leads me towards distraction, but with
Yeah.
a helpful way that leads me towards traction.
Would you liken that to mindfulness? Because when I hear you say that, I'm like, that sounds like mindfulness to me. Just being the observer of how you feel and why you feel a certain way you feel. Am I oversimplifying that?
Well, so mindfulness is great if it works for you. I think
Okay.
it's one technique. I
Okay.
don't think it's the kit and caboodle. I don't think it always applies to every situation. Part of
Okay.
it is that, and again, just to be very clear, I'm going to get some hate mail if this isn't understood clearly. I'm not saying it's not a good technique. I say the
Sure.
same thing about meditation.
Sure.
Meditation is wonderful, but I think a lot of people somehow make it into the cure for everything.
Yes.
You have
I
a
agree.
problem, just sit with it. And you know what? Sometimes that's the answer,
Yeah.
but it's not a cure-all.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to get off your ass, stop meditating, and fix the goddamn problem.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not always about mindfulness and meditation. That's a good tool, but
Mm,
not everything that the appropriate tool is a hammer. Sometimes you need to use a screwdriver. Sometimes you need to use a wrench. Sometimes you need to use a jackhammer. It's not always one tool.
that
So
makes sense.
mindfulness is a tool, but it's just one of many, many, many tools.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because that's kind of where I was. And being a type A, like always grab the jackhammer. For me, that's a great tool to remember, because I'm kind of counterbalancing how much of the type A I normally am. Right. So, but that's a
Yeah.
personal thing. It's not, I'm glad you clarified that, because it's not the
Right.
one size fits all for everybody. So that's really
I
important.
I think where mindful, and there's a very important distinction between when you should use certain techniques versus others,
Mhm.
and that is to only act upon the things that will affect change.
Yeah.
So if there are things that you cannot change, that's where learning to cope with the discomfort in a healthier manner can be very helpful. So
Yeah.
mindfulness and meditation are wonderful for helping us deal with the uncomfortable sensations that we can't necessarily do anything about. We can't necessarily change the fear we feel because of what's happening in the world. So we
Yeah.
can cope with it in a healthier manner through mindfulness, through meditation. But many other problems we can do something about. And so we don't want to shortchange ourselves to say, oh, any problem in the world, just pray about it, just meditate
Mhm.
about it, just be
Yeah.
mindful about it. No, sometimes that's not the right the right tool,
Right.
particularly for the things that we can actually fix, that we can actually do something about.
Right. Excellent. Let's shift and talk about the other side, right? That's what we want to talk about. So Indistractable was the follow up to Hooked. I got the order right, correct? It was Hooked and then Indistractable.
Right. Exactly.
On the flip side of that, let's talk about some of the work that you did to, in essence, help craft, or at least study the craft of, I believe you're involved with the implementation of too, of, if I'm remembering correctly, um, of helping people craft products, whether they're apps or online programs, what have you, to get people quite literally hooked to come back and frequent those specific platforms. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work that you did, how you got involved with doing that work, and some of the major things that you discovered? Just kind of giving a little
Sure.
preview of what you talked about in the book.
Yeah, yeah. So Hooked was really an attempt to democratize the techniques that are used by the social media companies, the gaming companies, many different products that we all use and find ourselves engaging with sometimes too much, right? The social
Hmm.
media companies, the gaming companies. I wanted to uncover what were the techniques that companies like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat all use to
Hmm.
keep people hooked. And the intention was never to write the book for them. Why would they need it? They've been using
Right.
these techniques for years.
Right.
The idea was to use these techniques for good, right? So that if what if we could use these same techniques that Facebook and the gaming companies and Google use to keep people using their products? What if we could use those same methods to help people exercise more? And that's exactly what's happened. Since Hooked was published 5 years ago, companies like Fitbod get people hooked to exercising in the gym. Well, at least before this coronavirus.
Yeah.
Actually, now they actually have a free version that they've made available. It was a paid product. Now they have a home exercise program, so you can get
I,
hooked to
I
exercise.
need that, because I've had so many home workout injuries the last week and a half. You have no idea.
There you go. I hope you're all right.
Yeah, I'm good, man, but
All right,
I need to dial it
good.
back. Yeah.
So other products like education products. So I was fortunate enough to invest in Kahoot, the world's largest educational software. They
Mhm.
actually went public a few months ago.
That's awesome.
They're doing amazing things by getting hooked kids hooked to in classroom learning.
Mhm.
Companies like the New York Times, one of my clients, that I help them with their app to get people hooked to reading the news. So it's really about how can we use these techniques to help form good habits in our lives through
Mhm.
the products that we use. And I think it's interesting with the coronavirus crisis. It's interesting how quickly the conversation has changed. Have you noticed this, by the way? When I was doing these interviews in or in months past, uh, the conversation was about how these evil tech companies are manipulating our behavior. And now the conversation is, oh my God, thank goodness we have these technologies, because what the hell would we do? Right?
Oof.
Like, can you imagine if this crisis had occurred 30 years ago?
Oh my
Right?
gosh.
Before Skype, before Zoom, before Amazon Prime, before Netflix,
Well, look
before Zoom.
look at swine. Swine, I think, killed 500,000 people, but I don't recall. And I was in college at this point, so I don't remember if it
Mm.
was this kind of craziness. But I seem to remember people. I think we just kind of had to push through it. I don't think we had a choice.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anywhere near as severe as this. This
Yeah.
is, orders of magnitude worse.
Yeah.
But the like, we never had a national, a third
Right.
of Americans at home.
Mm.
But what would we do? Right? It would be, I mean, it would be impossible. I tell you what,
Yeah.
they wouldn't tell us to quarantine. They would say, well, people aren't going to stay at home because they're going to go
That's
crazy at home.
that's the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Whereas today, being at home is actually not so bad. It's,
Not bad at
it's,
all.
I'm not saying it's heaven, right? There's some
Sure.
trouble to it, but
Sure.
man, is it better than it would have been 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. You you talk about two concepts I think are really important to discuss here, and that's frequency and utility, right?
Hmm.
And so I'd allow you to kind of further elaborate on what those two entail. One of the things that was coming up the most, not only with myself but with there's with clients and students alike, is there's a lot of local service-based business owners. Maybe they have some ideas for ancillary services that could potentially involve frequency. Again, I'll let you elaborate on what those are so people know what the heck I'm talking about.
Hmm.
Um, so you say in the book, basically, this book might not be for you. In effect, I don't know if it's exactly your words, that if you don't have frequency, that the hook model doesn't really potentially work as it would for one that does have frequency. Is there
Right.
anything that
Yeah.
is there anything that those people can do that doesn't distract them from their main core? I talked about the one thing earlier with Gary Keller, right? I firmly believe in that. But is there something that they can do if they have something that doesn't have frequency, but they do have utility in the business, where they can add that without completely distracting themselves from their one thing?
Yeah, so this is a really important point that the book is about how to build habit forming products. That's the subtitle,
Right.
Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products.
Mm,
And so the number one criteria, and I say this in the very first chapter of the book,
yeah.
the number one criteria that differentiates what kind of product can become a habit versus one that will never become a habit is frequency.
Hmm.
So if your product is something that is a one-time use product, or something that is bought very infrequently, is used very infrequently, that might not be a good candidate to form a habit around, because it just won't become a habit. And the line of demarcation, it's not enterprise versus consumer, or B2B versus that doesn't matter. What
Right.
matters is how often the product is used,
Mm,
because we know that there's a precipitous drop off in the likelihood of forming a habit if the behavior does not occur in a week's time or less. That is
yeah.
really
That was a game changer for
the
me, by the way. That
yeah,
that that part was
very,
a
very
big game
important.
changer. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course the question is, well, okay, that's great, but what if I have a business where the product isn't used with that kind of frequency? What kind of business might that be? Let's say it's car insurance. Okay, you
Mm,
don't use car insurance once a week, right? That will never be a habit
let's
forming
hope not.
product. Let's hope not, right? So what do you do if you're in that case? Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't have some kind of competitive advantage, what Warren Buffett calls a moat around your business, then you will fight on price and features all day long, right?
Mm,
Look at Geico, right? Okay, Geico, 15 minutes will save you 15% on car insurance. And then the next guy comes along and says, oh, yeah, well, 12 minutes will save you 20% on car insurance. So
mm,
what you're doing is essentially constantly beating each other up on
mhm.
price and features, and you never get excess returns. And
Yeah.
so what that means is you have to have some kind of competitive advantage, some kind of moat. Now, habits are one type of competitive advantage. There are others. You can have intellectual property. You can have economies of scale. There's lots of other competitive moats that you can build around your product or service. One of them is a habit. Now, not every business needs that to be a competitive advantage, but every business, unless you're going to fight on price and features all day long,
Mhm,
has to have one at least competitive advantage.
mhm,
So if your product is not used with sufficient frequency, what do you do? Well, what you can do is you can bolt on a habit forming experience onto a product that's not used with sufficient frequency. And there are two
mm,
ways to do this. I call this the two C's. The two C's stands for content and community. So let me talk about content for a minute. So Williams Sonoma is a great example of this. Williams Sonoma, in the United States, at least, I'm not sure how international they are, but in the United States, this is a company that sells cookware. So pots and pans and all kinds of cooking supplies. But they realize that people do not buy cooking supplies
yeah,
frequently enough to form a habit. It's not going to happen.
mm,
So what did they do? They decided to create a content consumption habit. So they started a website called taste.com, which has been rated consistently as one of the best cooking related websites on the web. And it's not even explicitly branded with Williams-Sonoma, but they have created this habit of creating, of helping people consume their content frequently. Twice a day, they're cranking out interesting content, recipes and interviews and ideas, stuff that people who are into cooking really love to check
Yeah.
habitually. So some people go to the New York Times, some people go to ESPN, some people go to taste.com out of habit. Now, why do they do that? Because they understand this mantra that monetization is a result of engagement, not the other way around. Let me say that again. Monetization is a result of engagement, not the other way around. So what happens when someone who is hooked onto taste.com decides it is time to buy some cookware? Where are they going to get it from?
Yeah.
Well, they have this trusted relationship with Williams-Sonoma. So when it's time to transact, that's going to be their
Answer's
vendor
been
of
made.
choice. Another example is community. So you can create a content consumption habit. You can also create a community habit. So let me give you another example. You know, I talked about how the behavior needs to occur within a week's time or less. Let me give you an example of a product that couldn't be more farther from that requirement. Christmas ornaments. Okay, Christmas ornaments are clearly not something that people buy every week.
Don't challenge my wife on that. Don't challenge my wife.
Okay.
On
Oh, okay. So
that.
is she by any chance a member of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club? Does that sound familiar?
I don't know. I
Yep.
don't think.
Okay. So 300,000 Americans are members of this club, the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club. And you will see, believe it or not, in the middle of July, in the middle of summer, you will see people lined up in front of these Hallmark stores to buy Christmas ornaments. Why? How can that be? Because they have this ingenious part of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club where they facilitate community. And so let me tell you, okay, you're going to run out and get a membership when I tell you this, but part of the benefits of being a member of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club, get ready for this, is that when they have a shipment of new Christmas ornaments, you as a member are invited to help unpack the shipment.
Oh, that's so smart.
Right. So for most of us, that sounds like slave labor. Why the heck would I want to help you, stock your shelves?
But for neophiliacs, man, that's first dibs on getting their eyeballs.
There's that. And there's the fact that Marjorie's going to be there and Bill's going to be there and Jimmy's going to be, all my friends are going to be there. And they're also into this stuff. And so they are selling the product is the Christmas ornaments, but the value is the community of connecting with other people. And so they bolted on this habit around community interaction. You can do this online as well as offline around enthusiasts for this product. And so that becomes the habit. Now, again, the byproduct of all that engagement with the community, monetization is a result of engagement, will be that when it's time to get Christmas ornaments, well, where else do you think people are going to shop other than the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club?
Yeah, that's amazing. Something you say it's important just across the board is, and I said this, I was in a blue collar, my first business was in a blue collar, really antiquated offline space. And one of the things that we did that got us ahead, that we grew leaps and bounds the way that we did, was we layered on an element of technology on top of what is a traditional business. And that just grossly enhanced our abilities. And it just made us just far superior as a service. So I think that just in and of itself is so fundamentally important, but your more meta specifics around it, I think, is supremely helpful. So thank you for clarifying that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's some low tech ways to do this. I mean, I'll give you a good example. When I get my hair cut, I don't shop for who has the best price anymore.
Right.
Why? Because I have my same barber who knows my name, who knows my haircut, who knows my daughter's name. Those are all forms of investment. I talk about the hook models, these 4 basic steps of a trigger, an action, a reward, and investment. You couldn't have a more offline business than a barber shop.
Yeah.
And yet I keep going. And I know a lot of people do this. And frankly, I don't even know what anyone else would charge, because I just always pay my barber, because why? I've invested in that relationship, right? And not only that, more important, not only did I invest in that relationship by giving that information, right? Telling my barber about, my life and my name and my kid's name and, what's going on. And, so that it becomes, I gave him the information, but more importantly, as a business owner, he kept notes. Whether it's a little file, a little index card about his customers, or it's in his head. A lot of people who I've gotten my hair cut by lots and lots of different barbers who I don't go back to anymore because I built no loyalty to them. right? And this is something, by the way, this is a very offline business, but it's something that every business can learn from, because too many businesses out there, they treat every customer the same. And it's a critical mistake, because in this day and age, before you could say, it's very difficult, right? To take down the information about every customer's family and preferences, that's too much work. Today, what the hell is your excuse? It's
Yeah.
called a CRM system.
Yeah.
Who can't learn how to use
Anybody.
technology?
Yeah.
Anybody can do that,
Yeah.
right? So keeping that information about your customers, that's that fourth step of the hook model that anybody today can implement, online, offline, enterprise, consumer web. Anybody can do that.
Super. To that point, Sport Clips is based here in Austin, Texas, where I'm located. To your point, when you go in there, they have whatever they did to your hair last when you were there is saved in their system, so that you don't have to I want it like this and I want it like that, and re-explain. They're like, last time you had this, do you want to do that again? Boom, done. They already cut your hair. It's amazing.
What a great example. That is the investment phase, I think, is the most overlooked of the 4 steps of the hook model.
Totally agree.
And I think any business who's not doing that is making a huge mistake.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about that then, kind of digging into this a little bit. So this is kind of a 2-parter here. Maybe we'll address the first one, and just kind of take it in order sequentially. Is what do you see to be the biggest mistake that a lot of people, so I think as we read the book, I'll give you some context here. For me, I remember the hardest part was not consuming the book. It was also controlling the amount of the wave of ideas that were coming into my brain as I was reading. As I was reading, I was like, "Oh my God, this is a good idea!" And I was just working on my hook model yesterday, if I'm being quite candid.
Good.
Yeah. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see with people kind of consolidating these ideas and then putting it into action and making them effective and so on and so forth? What are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making? Is it leaving out an element, or what is the biggest mistake with them implementing the hook model or using it?
The biggest mistake I see is that there is still this notion that the companies, the most world-changing companies of the past few decades, when you think about Apple and Facebook and Slack and
Amazon,
Amazon, that these guys just got lucky. That wow, Zuckerberg, right place, right time. No, I mean, look, everybody knows that Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard, and they know he was a computer science major. But did you know he was actually a double major before he dropped out? You know what his other major was?
I do not.
Psychology. Right? That Kevin Systrom was a symbolic systems major at Stanford, where I used to teach. Symbolic systems is about the intersection of technology and psychology. That these people know what makes you click and what makes you tick better than you understand yourself.
That's the biggest part of marketing that I've underestimated. Sorry to interject there.
Yeah.
The psychology aspect, I think, is something I fundamentally came across. I'm like, I'm being a really shitty marketer. And I think the reason why is because I'm not tapping into that. And once I start tapping into that, I feel like I had a deeper understanding of what people actually want. So that's something we don't talk about that. We talk about the X's and O's and strategies and, CTRs and, cost per click and all this stuff on these ad platforms and the X's and O's of it. But we don't talk about the fundamental aspect, which is to understand human beings at a core level. That's such an important thing to mention.
That's so true. I mean, that's when you start to see the matrix, is when you understand the deeper psychology of why people do what they do. So there's a level of marketers out there, and this is the vast majority of marketers. They just do what everybody else is doing.
Right, exactly.
Right? Oh, the competition, look at their ad. Okay, let's make one that kind of looks like that. Or, it seems like they're spending money here, so let's just do that. Or the product features that our competition has, so we should do that too. Why? Well, because they're doing it. Yeah. That's stupid. Instead of doing what the competition is doing, or what the hippo said. This is what a lot of companies do. They do whatever the hippo is the highest paid person's opinion.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
The boss says we should do this. Okay, let's do it. Why? Boss says so. That's stupid. Or even better. Okay, so this is more recent. Now we're informed. We do customer development, right? We listen to our customers. The problem is what people say they want is often completely different from what they actually do. So customer feedback is incredibly important. We can't skip that step.
Yeah.
But before we do any of that stuff, the first step has to be to understand the psychology of why people do what they do, so that we can come up with appropriate hypotheses, right? If you want to just copy what the competition is doing, you're always going to be a step behind. But if you can come up with, hey, you know what? I have a theory. I heard about variable rewards. I heard about loss aversion. I heard about whatever it might be, scarcity heuristic, whatever. There's tons of these different factors of consumer psychology. I want to test something based on this hypothesis that's based on 30, 40-year-old consumer psychology research. Let's put it to the test. That's how we generate the kind of ideas that create results before anyone understands why they work. And we keep that a secret to ourselves, right? We understand,
Hmm.
oh, this worked because of this principle. That's why it works so well,
Yeah.
is because we can generate better hypotheses that then we can go out and test. Now, not every idea we test is going to work. But the point is, if you can be the person who generates more ideas and puts them through this build, measure, learn loop faster than
Mm.
your competition, some of those ideas are going to be, revolutionary. They're going to be
Right.
amazing things.
Right.
But it all has to start with, where do we generate our hypotheses? And I say, instead of listening to the hippo, instead of even listening to your customer, let's go back to the fundamental principles of consumer psychology. Why do
Yeah.
people do what they do?
Yeah. Totally agree. That's awesome. All right, part two, I said this was a two-parter.
Yeah,
When you're testing, you talked about the four elements of, the loop. When you're testing that and you did deploy, so you take those ideas, you finally consolidated them, you've broken them down, you understand the psychology of your customer and so on and so forth.
hmm
When you're testing that, are there any measurables? How do I know this is working? How do I know this
sure.
part is what's not working? Is the whole thing, do I need to scrap the whole thing? Or is it just this one little specific thing I need to tweak? How do you kind of consolidate that or reconcile that?
Yeah. That's a terrific question. So, where the hook model is really helpful is either in the very early stages, when there's no product at all, and before you commit any code, before you pay a designer, before you do anything, you sit down with a pen and paper and you ask yourself if your product meets this archetype of a habit-forming product. And there's only 5 key questions you need to ask to determine that.
Hmm.
So then you can, before you build it, you understand, okay, what the key parts of the hook model are. So that's where it's really helpful. The other place it's really helpful is when the product is already in market and it's not getting the kind of engagement and retention you would expect. It's
Okay.
not hooking people. And so you can take out the hook model and say, okay, what element is missing? So now it's a diagnostic tool. Now you can say, do we have a really good internal trigger? Is the external trigger appropriately timed? Is the action as simple as it can possibly lead to a reward? The next step, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work the user does to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? And you can see right away which part of your hooked model is deficient in some way.
Okay.
Then what we do is we generate hypotheses. We say, okay, well, I think we can improve the variable reward like this. I think we can scratch the user's internal trigger like this, whatever it might be. Then the method we use is called cohort analysis. And so cohort analysis, there are many companies these days that now will do this that didn't exist when I first wrote the book. Companies like Amplitude, for example,
Hmm.
provide these dashboards where what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we define what a habitual user looks like. And
Hmm.
every product is going to be different, right? So one company says, we need somebody to use this product multiple times a day, right? If you're a social network or a news service, I don't know,
Right.
you would
Right.
expect a habituated user to use it many times a day. Other products, it might only be once a week, which is fine. Whatever that level of frequency is, what you do is you say, okay, what percentage of my user base is currently habituated?
Mm.
2%, 5%, 10%, 20%, what is it? What percentage of users are currently habituated? Then we make the change. We improve the hook model in some way based on those hypotheses that we generated. And then we see, okay, for this cohort of people who now were exposed to the new user interface, right, after we've made these changes, did that percentage of habituated users go up, go down, or stay the same, right? If it
Mm.
went down, then go back to the last version of
That
the
was the
product.
last. Mm.
If it went up, well, then that's great. Now we're in the right direction.
Okay. That is super helpful. That was actually a challenge that I had as recently as yesterday as I was going through my own and thinking, how am I going to know which part of this is working? So that's super helpful. I'm actually going to go back and review that myself.
Awesome.
Cool, man. So for those that want to learn more about the work that you do and then Hooked itself, where can they go? What are some links, social media,
Sure.
websites, etc.?
Yeah, so I just published the 5-year edition, the new edition of Hooked. Didn't
Nice.
really change all that much in terms of the fundamental model, but there's an extra case study in there now
Cool.
and some other cool tidbits. So you can buy that wherever books are sold. It's called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And my second book is called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And my website is nirandfar.com. Nir spelled like my first name,
So awesome.
Nir and far.com.
So awesome. All right, Nir, thanks so much, man. You lived up to my praise.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Great talking to you.
All right, buddy. You too, man. See ya.